I'm James Barfield with your Urban Connection. And remember, this is the channel that is often imitated, but never duplicated. Now, first of all, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, ladies and gentlemen, because this is a channel that I think you'll want to be notified whenever we do one of these broadcasts, because most of what you hear on this show, you won't hear anywhere else. Now, I want to talk about a situation that's taking place or has taken place in Memphis, Tennessee, where 5 police officers were fired from the department because of the beating death of a young unarmed Black male. Now, there were 5 officers involved, and they were fired, and they were charged with violating police policies. And there were 3 distinct charges that were levied against these officers. Now, not all 5 of these officers took place in the physical beating, but they witnessed it. And they did nothing to stop it. And they did nothing to render aid to the deceased. So the 3 charges were levied against these 5 officers, not all of them. Not all of the charges applied to all of the officers. But the charges were use of excessive force, failure to intervene, and failure to render aid. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I am sick and tired of hearing about, reading about, or having knowledge of these kinds of activities that are carried out and conducted by law enforcement officers. And let me just tell you, this is a national issue. And we've been trying to correct it and stop it locally. And we're never going to do that. So let me just tell you what the whole story is about here. The term excessive force, police brutality, shooting death of an unarmed man, Black men in particular. You see, all of that falls under one category. And the category is used on a national level, and it applies to law enforcement across the country. And the category is called qualified immunity. Now, so why is it that we have so many times this same occurrence in a different locale in the United States, and almost always the police officers are found either by a wayward district attorney or by a non-informed jury? These officers are found to be not guilty, time after time after time. Now, I want to say 2 things here. First of all, when I say that we're trying to deal with it locally, too oftentimes we're doing just the opposite of what we should be doing. And I want to say this to you, all of you young people, you're making a huge mistake. Throwing rocks, throwing bottles, breaking out windows, destroying personal property is not has not, and will not ever be the answer to this problem. As a matter of fact, you're making matters worse. You're playing right into the hands of the very people that you need to make this change and get rid of qualified immunity. Now, what do I mean by that? The people, peaceful protest, I'm all in favor of. You have every right to peacefully protest, but do it in a manner that helps your cause instead of hurts your cause. Now, I have said, and I've been saying for the longest, Black people, African Americans, we need to start using our voices. And I've always said, you've got two forms of power that you don't use. One is the power of your voice, and the second is the power of your vote. But tonight I want to dwell on and focus my attention on the power of your voice. Now, when I say the power of your voice, I have to ask a question. But first, let me make a statement. When I say the power of your voice and using it, you see, what we do is we gather on street corners, in churches, or in auditoriums, or whatever, and basically we use our voice to preach to the choir. We preach to each other. And we've been doing this over and over and over. And we do it all over the country, locally. But our voices are not reaching the people that need to hear our voice. For you see, those people are in Washington, D.C. And those people are called congressmen, U.S. congressmen, and U.S. senators. Now, these are the people that need to hear our, and when I say our, I mean collectively, from city to city, from state to state, collectively. They need to hear our voices in mass numbers. And we need to be saying to them, we have had enough already. We are not asking for it, but we are demanding the removal of qualified immunity from these law enforcement officers all across the country. You see, until that happens, nothing is going to change. Now, so let me just tell you the voices that are missing. Now, not only a lot of individuals without any clout, but the politicians that are in Washington, D.C. that have some clout, their voices are muted on this issue. Our civil rights organizations, they claim to speak for the voiceless, they claim to speak for the disadvantaged, they claim to speak for African Americans and other people of color regarding the continued killing of our innocent, young, unarmed Black men and women. Those voices are muted. The politicians, the civil rights organizations, their voices are muted. The so-called civil rights leaders, their voices are muted. So we don't have a voice that is speaking for us to address this issue of qualified immunity. We don't have a voice in Washington, D.C. Now, there were two African Americans, one Democrat and one Republican, that were working on police reform and making changes. And the big hang-up was qualified immunity. You see, the Republican African American, Tim Scott, did not want to go against qualified immunity because his Republican colleagues didn't want to go with qualified immunity. Now, we got to remember something, ladies and gentlemen. Many of Tim Scott's colleagues are racist. Some of them are white supremacists. Some of them are people that work, or they don't, but they have members of relatives, friends, whatever, that work in law enforcement. And these people sought out law enforcement for one single reason. Because they knew that as a member of law enforcement, they could induce injury, harm, or even death to African Americans and never have to face any consequences. Now, this is fact, what I'm telling you. It's a known fact. The FBI has facts to show that ex-military men will join law enforcement in various cities around the country. They want law enforcement because law enforcement gives them a protection that they wouldn't have anywhere else. You see, they use this stand your ground law. And that is what these attorney generals and district attorneys use, the stand your ground law. And they say that the stand your ground law, they can't prosecute because the courts won't allow them basically to prosecute because of qualified immunity. Now, here's the thing, what they don't tell you. And I have seen this myself. The judges in several cases have said that they are tired of having to let these law enforcement officers off the hook, even though the evidence shows they're guilty, but they can't prosecute them because of qualified immunity. See, that's a problem. But that's a problem we have got to face in numbers. I mean, you can't do this because, look, Detroit, you can deal with this locally. That does not change the federal law, federal statute that affords and allows this qualified immunity. These Memphis officers, they've been fired. The police department has stated that they violated several police department policies. But when it goes to court, I'm not saying it will, I don't know. But more often than not, it turns to a different situation, a different level, and the experienced defense attorneys will always use the defense of qualified immunity. This officer cannot be charged, okay, because of qualified immunity. That is the only way that we're ever going to get change in this federal law, qualified immunity. You've got to go before, your voice has to be made before the US congressmen and the US senators from your various states, and it has to affect all 50 states because these occurrences of killing our unarmed young Black men, either by shooting or by police brutality or by physical beating, which was the case here in Memphis, Tennessee. Now, let me say this before I forget. This case in Tennessee, the 5 officers that were fired were all African Americans. What that shows is that bad cops come in all colors, all shapes, in all forms, okay? Now, we've had several instances where people have said, well, they need more training. These people don't need any more training. These people are rogue cops, bad cops, who want to take matters into their own hands. They want to be the judge, jury, and executioner. Okay? We can't have that. That is not your job. Your job, which you took an oath to, was to serve and protect. And you're not protecting somebody when there's 5 officers and I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4, I don't know how many, you beat the hell out of him. You beat the life out of this guy. He's dead. And you left him dead. And you made no attempts to revive this guy or to find out the nature of his illness or any of that. You made no attempt to intervene. If you were not one administering the beating, you made no attempt to intervene to stop the ones that were beating this man to death. It is time for this to stop, but it's not going to stop by us preaching to the choir. We've been doing that for how long now? 40 years, 50 years? How has that worked out for you? Now, you know the definition of insanity. I don't have to tell you. Keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. It's not going to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to let these people know that we won't stand for it. We won't stand for another Black man, unarmed, being killed because of a traffic stop. We certainly are against that. We don't see that happening in other than Black and brown people. And I can show you instance after instance after instance when white men, unarmed, have been stopped and do not follow orders, and some even attack the officer, and they live to talk about it. They're still living to this day. And I can show you videos of it. So it's nothing new. It's our problem, and we have to solve it. But we will never solve it talking to each other. The people we need to be talking to don't hear a word we say. They don't take us seriously. So we need to mobilize as a group, as a race of people, and we need to mobilize in numbers, and we need to have the participation of our Black politicians. We need to have the participation of our Black civil rights organizations, and we need to have the participation of our Black so-called civil rights leaders whose voices have been muted to this point. Now you think I'm lying? Tell me the last time that you have heard any Black politician, any Black civil rights organization, or any Black civil rights leader talking about qualified immunity. It's not happening. And nothing is going to change until it does happen. Don't be surprised if on tomorrow's news, there's another instance of an unarmed Black male being murdered either by shooting death, beating death, or a knee in his back until he can't breathe. Don't be surprised if it happens in a city near you. We cannot wait until it comes to us. We have to act now to get this federal statute removed from the books. Right? So that's where we're at. This show is long overdue because what I'm saying to you now should have been said 30, 40 years ago. We should have had this law removed from the books. Police officers and law enforcement officers, your job is to serve and protect Your job is not to be the judge, jury, and executioner. You will find that nowhere in your police handbook, in your sheriff's handbook, nowhere in your law enforcement handbook. No matter which side of law enforcement you won't find that anywhere. So folks, we've got to mobilize. Don't sit back and wait for somebody else to do it for you. You've got to get involved. Why do you think that Martin Luther King had a march on Washington? Ladies and gentlemen, why do you think the Million Man March landed in Washington, D.C.? Because that's where the laws are made, the federal laws. That's where these statutes are formed by U.S. congressmen and U.S. senators. Those are the people we need to be talking to. Those are the people we need to make the change in this qualified immunity law and take it off the books. Okay? I'm James Barfield.